You know, for nearly 40 years I thought my husband spent his Saturdays laughing over cards with his old buddies. But the day one of those men died, and his widow showed up at my doorstep with trembling hands, I realized I'd been living beside a truth so painful it nearly stopped my heart. My name is Evelyn, though everyone just calls me Evie now. I'm 78 years old, and this is the first time, truly the first time, I've gathered the courage to speak this story out loud. Before I begin, my sweet dears, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you enjoy these old life tales from a grandma who's lived long enough to learn the hard lessons. I'm finally ready to tell this one, even if my voice shakes a little. So let me take you back to a time when life felt simpler, when America smelled like fresh laundry, gasoline from big old station wagons, and pies cooling on neighborhood windowsills. It was the late 1960s, the kind of year where radios hummed softly in every home, and kids rode bicycles until their legs were jelly. Back then I was a young wife, barely 24, living in a little yellow house on Pineberry Street, a place where every woman knew every woman and every porch light looked the same. My husband, Walter, was the kind of man who drew attention without trying. Broad shoulders, thick dark hair, and a laugh that filled a whole room. He worked at the mill, came home smelling of pine dust and machine oil, and every Saturday, every single one, he'd leave around 6 p.m. with his favorite brown jacket slung over his shoulder. "Cards with the boys," he'd say, giving me that easy smile. And for years I believed him. Back then, my world revolved around my kitchen. Oh, I can still smell it. The warm yeast of rising dough, the sharp sweetness of fresh apples waiting for pie, and the faint smokiness from the cast-iron skillet that never left the stove. My daughter Lena was only 6, with hair like soft corn silk, and my little boy Mark toddled behind me with jam-sticky fingers. Those were golden days, simple, warm, and safe. Saturday evenings were my quiet time. After feeding the children and tucking them beneath their quilted covers, I'd make myself a cup of chamomile tea, slide into my rocking chair by the old bay window, and knit while watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The neighborhood had a rhythm, steady, predictable, comforting. Walter would always come home just after midnight. Smelled of cigarettes even though he never smoked. Said the boys did, and it clung to his clothes. He'd kiss my cheek and fall into bed snoring within minutes. And I never questioned it. Not once. Because that's what wives from my generation did. We trusted our husbands even when maybe we shouldn't have. Looking back now, there were tiny things, little flickers, little shadows, that I should have noticed sooner. A forgotten receipt, a stray scent that wasn't smoke or card table snacks, a quietness in his eyes when I asked how his night went. But love makes the world blurry sometimes. And I was in love with that man. Heaven help me, I was. Life rolled on gently like a slow river. Summers melted into winters, and years piled softly like snow on porch railings. Our children grew. Our hair grayed. And still, every Saturday Walter went to play cards. I held on to those years so dearly, until the day the phone rang and everything shifted. It was a Tuesday morning. I still had flour on my hands from kneading dough. "Evie," the voice said, trembling, "did you hear? Harold, he's passed." Harold was Walter's closest card buddy. The one he always mentioned first. I felt a sting of sadness, for the man, for his family, for the memories of simpler nights. I had no idea the truth was already walking toward my home, wearing black, holding an envelope that would shatter everything I thought I knew. And that's where I'll pause, my dears. The morning Harold died felt strangely still, as if the world itself held its breath. The sky was overcast, the kind of soft gray that made the neighborhood look faded, like an old photograph tucked behind church bulletins. I remember wiping my flour-covered hands on my apron, staring out the kitchen window as the news settled into my bones. Death was no stranger in our community. We lived in a town where people aged together like leaves turning through the seasons. But something about Harold's passing felt heavier. Walter came home early that evening, which surprised me. He didn't hang his jacket properly, he just tossed it over a chair. Something he'd never done. I glanced at him, noticing the wrinkles of worry around his eyes. "You all right, Walt?" I asked gently. He nodded, but his throat bobbed like he was swallowing something too big. Just thinking about all the years we spent together. You know how it is." His voice cracked ever so slightly. I didn't push. In those days, wives rarely pressed their husbands to talk, especially about grief. I simply placed my hand on his arm and said I'd make him some warm stew. He gave me a small, grateful smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. People in the neighborhood brought casseroles to Harold's widow, Marjorie, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair always tucked neatly behind her ears. I hadn't seen her much over the years, though we lived only a few streets apart. Funny how you can live so close to someone and still know so little. Then came Saturday. Ironically, it was the first Saturday in decades that Walter didn't leave the house. He stayed home, moving slowly, touching things absent-mindedly, the rim of his coffee cup, the edge of the dining table, his old watch. Lena noticed too. "Is Daddy okay?" she whispered to me. "He's just sad, sweetheart," I said, brushing her hair. Mark toddled over to his father, offering him his toy truck, and Walter forced a smile so tender it made my heart ache. Around late afternoon, a knock sounded at our door. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to answer it, expecting maybe a neighbor dropping off something for Harold's family. But when I opened the door, there stood Marjorie herself. Her eyes were red, her black dress slightly wrinkled, as though she'd been sitting somewhere crying for hours. Her hands clutched a small envelope, cream-colored, edges softened as though handled too many times. "Evie," she said, her voice trembling. I needed to talk to you." I felt a sudden chill. "Of course. Please come in." But she shook her head firmly. No, I can't come inside. I won't stay long." Behind me, Walter had risen from the couch. The moment he saw her, his face drained of color, like someone had pulled the very life out of him. His hand gripped the back of the chair, knuckles whitening. I turned back to Marjorie, confused. "Is everything all right?" She looked at Walter once, just once, and he looked away sharply, jaw tight. Then she turned back to me, her eyes filling with tears. "Before Harold died," she whispered, "he told me something. Something he said you deserved to know." Walter stepped forward. "Marjorie," he said in a low, warning tone, "this isn't the time." But she ignored him. "This," she said, lifting the envelope slightly, "is yours." I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like the world had tilted, like I was standing on uneven ground. What is it?" I asked, my voice barely more than breath. She swallowed hard. "My husband left this for you. And he begged me to give it to you as soon as I could. He said it was time for the truth." The truth. A word that suddenly felt cold against my skin. I looked over at Walter again. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anyone. His gaze had dropped to the floor, heavy, guilty, afraid. "I'm so sorry, Evie," Marjorie whispered. So sorry." The envelope trembled between her fingers. And in that moment, even before she placed it in my hand, I felt it. The beginning of the unraveling. For a long moment, I couldn't lift my hand to take the envelope. It felt as though my body had turned to stone, my arms heavy, my feet planted deep into the old wooden porch. The wind rustled the azalea bushes at the edge of our yard, and somewhere down Pineberry Street a dog barked, but everything around me sounded distant, muffled, like I'd been dropped underwater. Finally, almost on instinct, my fingers brushed the edge of the envelope. It was warm from being held tightly, soft at the corners, and in the top right corner, written in Harold's unmistakably neat handwriting, was my name, Evelyn. Seeing it made my breath catch. Why on earth would Harold, my husband's card-playing friend, have something meant specifically for me? Walter shifted behind me. I could feel his presence even without turning, tense, rigid, vibrating with a kind of fear I had never felt from him before. But I didn't look at him. Not yet. My eyes stayed locked on the envelope as though it held some ticking thing inside. "Thank you," I finally whispered to Marjorie, though my voice shook. She nodded, pressing her lips together as tears slid quietly down her cheeks. "He made me promise," she said softly. "Even when he was too weak to sit up, he made me swear I'd bring it to you. He said it was the one thing he couldn't leave undone." She lowered her gaze then, and I couldn't help but stare at her, really stare. There was a heaviness in her eyes, a sorrow that didn't seem to belong solely to a grieving widow. It was as if she carried another burden alongside her grief, one that had etched itself deeper with every passing hour. "I should go," she whispered. "I've kept you long enough." And just like that, she turned and walked slowly down the steps, her black dress fluttering against her legs. Her shoes made soft tapping sounds on the paved walkway, each one echoing in my ears. I watched her until she reached the sidewalk. She didn't look back. When I stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind me, Walter was standing in the living room with his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked smaller somehow, shrunk, deflated. "Evie," he said immediately, his voice hoarse, "whatever she gave you, whatever Harold wrote, just remember things weren't always so simple back then." His words struck me strangely. I clutched the envelope to my chest. "What does that mean?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. I don't want you jumping to conclusions." A cold ripple traveled down my spine. "Walter," I said slowly, "why would Harold write something to me? What does he know that I don't?" But before he could answer, or before he worked up the courage to, Lena and Mark burst in from the kitchen, giggling and chasing each other, completely unaware of the tension in the room. Their little voices sliced the moment in two, and Walter immediately stepped back, running a hand through his hair as if grateful for the interruption. "We'll talk later," he muttered. But the tone in his voice made my ribs tighten. Later. It felt like a word meant to stall the truth. I went to the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I sat down on the edge of the bed where the afternoon light slanted across the quilt I had sewn during my first pregnancy. My hands trembled as I held the envelope in my lap. My name stared up at me again, darker now, heavier. I slid a finger beneath the flap but froze before opening it. I wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, I pressed the envelope against my heart and closed my eyes, letting memories wash over me. All those Saturdays. All those late returns. The cigarette smell. The tired eyes. The softness in his tone whenever he said, "Cards were good tonight, honey." Suspicion, faint and uneasy, curled like smoke around my thoughts. I didn't open the envelope that day. I couldn't. But that night, as Walter slept beside me with his back turned, something he rarely did, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the unopened envelope resting like a weight on the nightstand. And in the dark, for the first time in my marriage, I felt the sharp sting of doubt settle into my bones. I didn't sleep much that night. The hours stretched long and thin like the shadows on our bedroom walls, and every time Walter shifted beside me, the mattress creaked in a way that made my heart thump harder, like it was reacting to something my mind hadn't fully grasped yet. The envelope remained unopened on the nightstand, its presence almost taunting, quiet but heavy like an unspoken sentence waiting to be read aloud. By morning, my eyes felt raw from exhaustion. The air in the room was cool and smelled faintly of the lavender sachets I kept in our dresser drawers, but even that comforting scent couldn't settle the unease pooling behind my ribs. Walter rose early, earlier than usual, and moved around silently. Too silently. When he bent down to tie his shoes, his shoulders looked stiff, hunched forward as though he carried a burden he didn't dare name. I sat up slowly, watching him, waiting for him to say something. Anything. Instead, he only murmured that he'd head to the mill early today. He didn't even kiss my forehead like he always did. He just slipped out the door with a mumbled, "See you tonight." The quiet click of the door closing sounded louder than it should have, echoing through the whole house. After getting the children fed and settled, I found myself drawn back to the bedroom. My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope, not to open it but simply to hold it. Its weight felt different today, denser, almost pulsing with a truth I wasn't ready to confront. I placed it gently in the top drawer of my nightstand, beneath a stack of neatly folded handkerchiefs. "Just until I'm ready," I whispered to no one. But deep down I knew I was delaying the inevitable. Later that afternoon, as I folded laundry in the living room, a small clue, one I'd somehow missed for years, found its way into my hands. Walter's brown jacket, the one he wore every Saturday, had been tossed over the back of a chair. I slipped my hand into the pocket to check for receipts or loose change before washing it, something I did out of habit. My fingers brushed something thin and papery. I pulled it out slowly. It was a matchbook, simple, cream-colored, with the name of a lounge I'd never been to, the Blue Lantern. Confused, I flipped it open. Only one match was missing, and inside was a faint lipstick smudge. Not my shade. Not even close. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I stared at it for a long time, the room suddenly feeling too small, too warm. The Blue Lantern wasn't anywhere near Harold's house or the mill or the grocery store. It was across town in a part of the city where people whispered more than they waved. I tried telling myself it meant nothing. Maybe the boys stopped there for a drink. Maybe someone else handed him the matchbook. Maybe, oh, how desperately I clung to the maybes. but the truth was beginning to glimmer through the cracks. That evening when Walter returned, I watched him closely. He avoided my eyes, moved gingerly around the children, and flinched a little when my hand brushed his arm. He ate quietly, barely touching his food. Every gesture felt calculated, rehearsed. Even his sighs seemed heavy with hidden meaning. After dinner, while he bathed Mark and Lena played with her dolls, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the matchbook lying on the counter. I realized then that the envelope wasn't the start of my doubt. It was just the moment I could no longer ignore it. For years there had been little signs, whispers of something I didn't want to face. And now they were gathering, forming a story that terrified me. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what Saturday nights had truly been. And as I cleaned the kitchen, the matchbook still sitting like a tiny, damning witness, I felt something shift deep inside me. Something like resolve, or perhaps self-preservation. The truth was coming whether I was ready or not. The following week dragged by like a wagon stuck in mud, every hour slow and thick with unease. And though I cooked, cleaned, tended to the children, and carried on with the routines that once gave my life rhythm, my mind never left that matchbook or the envelope hidden beneath my folded handkerchiefs. By Friday afternoon, a kind of restless energy had settled into my bones, making it impossible to sit still. I baked a peach cobbler just to keep my hands busy. Something sweet, something comforting, but even the warm scent drifting through the kitchen, buttery and familiar, did nothing to calm me. I kept glancing at the phone mounted on the wall, half expecting something, though I couldn't have said what. Around 6 o'clock, as the sun dipped low and cast golden streaks across the dining room floor, the phone suddenly rang, sharply, urgently, making me jump so hard the mixing spoon slipped from my hand and clattered onto the counter. I hurried over, wiping my palms on my apron. "Hello," I answered, trying to steady my breath. For a moment there was silence. Not the kind of static-filled pause of a wrong number, but a breath. Someone listening, someone deciding whether to speak. Is this Evelyn?" a woman's voice finally whispered. My heart stiffened. "Yes. Who's calling?" Another pause, and I could hear something fragile in her breathing, as if she were caught between fear and guilt. She began, then stopped. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be calling." "Wait," I said quickly, but the line had already gone dead. I stared at the receiver, confusion twisting into dread. I set the phone back onto its cradle, but before I could even take a step away, it rang again, this time so loudly that Lena peeked her head in from the hallway. I shooed her gently, waited until she disappeared, then answered. "Hello." Again no greeting. But this time a different woman's voice, older, steadier, though thick with something unspoken, filled the line. "Tell Walter," she said quietly, "that Saturday won't work anymore." My breath caught. "Who is this? What do you mean?" My voice trembled, but the woman didn't respond to the questions. Instead, she added something chilling, something that made my stomach twist. "And tell him, he shouldn't have made promises he couldn't keep." Before I could utter a single word more, the call ended. My hand shook as I set the phone down, my fingers trembling so hard I had to grip the counter to steady myself. "Saturday won't work anymore. Promises he couldn't keep." The words echoed through my mind like footsteps in an empty hall. My first instinct was denial. Surely this was a wrong number or some misunderstanding or someone playing a cruel prank. But deep down, beneath the layers of hope and the years of trust, something inside me whispered the truth I hadn't wanted to hear. This call wasn't random. This call was connected to Walter, to the matchbook, to the envelope. And suddenly, the world I had lived in for decades, a world built on routine, on trust, on shared mornings and soft goodnights, began to feel foreign, fragile, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets. When Walter came home later that evening, humming stiffly as he hung up his jacket, I watched him with new eyes. He smiled at the children, kissed the top of my head and asked about dinner. Everything he did was exactly as it had been for years. Yet now it all felt rehearsed, like a performance I'd never realized I was part of. I kept silent about the calls. Not out of fear, but out of a growing need, a determination, to understand what had been happening behind my back all these years. I needed the truth. And I knew then that the envelope, the matchbook, and those mysterious voices on the phone were only the beginning. Saturday was coming. And with it, so was the truth. Saturday arrived with a strange heaviness in the air, the kind that settles into your bones before you even fully open your eyes. I woke before the sun rose, lying still beside Walter as he breathed evenly, almost too evenly, like a man pretending to be deeply asleep. For a moment I watched him. The lines around his eyes, the faint graying at his temples, the familiar shape of the man I had loved for decades. And yet, beneath that familiarity, there was something foreign now, as if the person lying beside me had been drifting away, inch by inch, through the years without me noticing. I slipped quietly out of bed, letting my feet rest on the cold wooden floorboards, grounding myself. The envelope still sat inside my nightstand drawer, its presence weighing on me like a secret I hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. I didn't open it, not yet. But I could feel the truth inside it pulsing like a heartbeat. That morning, after feeding the children and sending them out into the yard to play, I began tidying around the house. I told myself it was just routine, but the truth was I was searching. Searching for something I didn't yet know how to name. When I reached the laundry room, I noticed Walter's work shirt tossed carelessly near the hamper. He was never careless with his clothes, not once in all our years together. As I picked it up, something stiff and folded inside the breast pocket caught my attention. I hesitated, then slowly reached in and pulled out a small envelope, thin brown, the kind banks used for receipts. My breath hitched. There was no name on it. No markings. Just a faint crease as if it had been opened and closed many times. My hands trembled as I opened it, expecting maybe a receipt, maybe some change. Instead, what I found made my knees nearly buckle. Inside were bills, crisp ones, far more than Walter ever carried. A thick stack of $20 bills, folded once across the middle. More money than we had spare in any given month. My heart hammered painfully as I spread them out, counting with shaky fingers. 200. Then 3. Then 4. By the time I reached $600, I had to grip the counter to stay steady. $600. In 1974, that wasn't pocket change. That was nearly a month's wages for many men. And it certainly wasn't money we had lying around. Questions rushed at me, swirling like a storm I couldn't outrun. Had he been saving without telling me? Why hide it? Why keep it in his shirt pocket of all places? And then, like a cold hand tightening around my throat, another thought slipped in, an awful whispering possibility. Was he giving money to someone else? Supporting someone? Paying for something he didn't want me to know about? My stomach twisted painfully. I sunk into the nearest chair, pressing the stack of bills against my lap, staring at them as though they might suddenly rearrange themselves into an answer. But money doesn't speak, it only exposes. After what felt like ages, I carefully returned the bills into the brown envelope and tucked it back exactly where I found it. I didn't want him to know I had seen it. Not yet. I needed more pieces before confronting him because Walter could be charming, persuasive. He could turn a story around so smoothly that even I, who had shared a bed and a life with him, might start to doubt my own instincts. When noon rolled around, I found myself watching him closely again. The way he avoided my gaze. The way he checked the clock again and again, his fingers tapping anxiously against his thigh. "You going out tonight?" I asked lightly, pretending to wipe flour from my hands. He froze for a beat, then nodded with a small, tight smile. "Yeah. Cards with the boys. I know it's been a tough week, but they want to get together. You know how it is." He didn't meet my eyes. And for the first time in my marriage, I heard the lie not in the words, but in the quiet space between them. Later that afternoon, as he showered and readied himself, I slipped into the bedroom and opened the nightstand drawer. I took out Harold's envelope, holding it gently between my fingers. I didn't open it, not yet, but tonight felt like the beginning of something. The moment life divides into before and after. I felt it deep in my chest, a trembling awareness that the truth, whatever shape it took, was coming for me. When Walter finally left the house around 6, wearing the same brown jacket and giving the same practiced smile, I watched him walk down the path, each step echoing louder than the last. He didn't look back. And neither did I. I simply closed the door softly behind me, leaned against it, and whispered to myself, "Tonight, Evelyn, tonight you learn the truth." That night, the house felt impossibly still. The kind of still where every creak of the floorboard sounded like a footstep behind you, and even the wind outside seemed to pause in anticipation. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope from Harold resting before me like a silent witness. My hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what I was about to uncover. I had waited long enough, tiptoeing around half-truths and subtle lies. My heart pounded as I broke the seal, slowly, carefully, as if the paper itself might bite me. Inside, I found a single sheet of thick stationery, Harold's handwriting curling delicately across the page. My eyes skimmed the words, and with every line, the world I had known for decades began to crumble. "Evelyn," it began, "if you are reading this, it means that I am gone, and the secrets I've carried are no longer mine to hold alone. I hope this letter finds you before too much damage is done." My stomach tightened and I swallowed hard. The letter continued, explaining things I had never imagined: Saturday nights, the card games, Walter's friends, the money, the arrangements, the betrayals I had only sensed but never named aloud. Harold wrote about debts Walter had taken on years ago, debts he couldn't tell anyone about, debts that had forced him into secret dealings, secret nights, secret promises. And then, almost casually, Harold mentioned the truth about him. The truth about Walter's card games, and why they weren't exactly what they seemed. Walter hadn't been lying about going out. He had been hiding a different kind of life behind that phrase, a life filled with deception and complicated loyalties that Harold had tried to shield me from, until now. I could feel tears pricking my eyes, the warmth of betrayal and heartbreak washing over me in a slow, suffocating tide. I had always thought of myself as perceptive, careful, even wise, but this letter, this simple sheet of paper, tore through decades of trust and tenderness I had taken for granted. I sank into the chair, clutching the letter, my mind spinning. The envelope from the brown jacket, the lipstick on the matchbook, the mysterious phone call, they all clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't been able to see clearly. Walter's Saturday nights, his sudden secrecy, the hidden money, it wasn't just mischief or harmless fun. It was a carefully orchestrated facade. My husband, the man who had held my hand through childbirth, who had walked with me through every scraped knee and bedtime story, had a life behind my back. And though Harold had tried to protect me, even he couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. I didn't hear Walter return from the card game that night. By the time the familiar creak of the front door reached me, I had read and reread the letter, each pass revealing another nuance, another betrayal. When he stepped into the kitchen, jacket slung casually over his shoulder, his smile faltered the instant he saw the letter in my hands. I could see the color drain from his face, the way his eyes darted around the room like a man caught in a spotlight. "Evelyn," he began, his voice unsteady, I can explain." But the words sounded small, insufficient, even to my own ears. I looked at him across the table, the letter between us like a wall of glass. The man I had trusted with my heart for so many years looked suddenly like a stranger. "Explain," I said slowly, my voice quiet but firm, "why every Saturday you went to play cards, and yet you were never truly there. Explain the money, the phone calls, the matchbook. Explain everything." He sank into the chair opposite me, rubbing his face with both hands, eyes filled with shame and despair. And then, almost in a whisper, he began to speak. Fragmented sentences, confessions he had held back for decades, apologies that came too late. My hands shook, tears fell, and I realized that the world I had known for so long had shifted irreversibly in the space of a single letter. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Walter's confessions, his trembling apologies, and the details from Harold's letter lingered in the air around me, clinging to the walls, the furniture, even the laughter of our children, who had no idea the foundation of their home was quietly cracking. At first I couldn't bear to look at him. Every glance, every half-smile, every attempt at normalcy reminded me of the betrayal that had been hidden for decades. Lena and Mark were still young enough to notice my sudden quietness, my tendency to stare off into the distance, lost in thought, and their innocent questions. "Mom, why do you look sad?" cut me more deeply than any confrontation with Walter could. I tried to answer, tried to tell them it was nothing, but how could I explain something so adult, so broken, without crushing their world? I couldn't. And so I carried the weight alone, pretending, smiling, baking pies and folding laundry as though life had not upended itself overnight. Financially, the aftermath was also bitter. The debts Walter had hidden, the very debts that had forced him to live this secret life, were larger than we could handle. Suddenly, I was thrust into a world of budgeting and bills I hadn't had to think about for decades. Letters from creditors began to arrive, crisp and cruel, piling on the kitchen table like a silent indictment of our choices and my husband's mistakes. I found myself walking into banks, negotiating, signing papers I had no experience reading, learning quickly that life had handed me a test I had not anticipated. And yet I did what I had always done, gritted my teeth, pulled on my courage and kept moving forward. Nights were hardest. I'd lie awake, listening to the house sigh in the darkness, wondering how I could possibly rebuild our life while keeping my children safe, fed and loved. Worse still was the judgment from our community. Neighbors whispered when Walter stepped out, their voices rising and falling like a tide of small-town condemnation. Some would look at me with sympathy, others with suspicion, their eyes questioning, always questioning the life we had built and the choices he had made. It was lonely. The phone calls, the envelopes, the hidden money, all of it had created an invisible barrier between me and the world I had trusted. And for weeks I walked through my own home like a stranger, every corner and shadow reminding me of secrets I could not forget. Yet even in that darkness I felt the first stirrings of resolve. I could not undo the past and I could not erase the betrayal. But I could choose how to respond. I began keeping lists, planning meals meticulously, tracking the household finances, finding work where I could, and reaching out to friends quietly for support. Women who had known me since I was a girl, who understood the subtle power of patience and quiet determination. Slowly the house stopped feeling like a prison and more like a place of action. I found strength I hadn't known I possessed, a resilience forged in heartbreak and necessity. Even the children noticed the change. Not the sadness but the quiet steel behind it, the way I spoke a little firmer, moved a little quicker, made decisions with clarity. By the end of that first month, Walter's guilt hung over us like a storm cloud, but I had begun to create small rays of sunlight in the house again. The children laughed more freely, the kitchen smelled of bread and cinnamon again, and I could, for brief moments, breathe without the weight of secrets pressing in. The journey was far from over, but I understood then that struggle was a teacher. That survival was not just about enduring, but about transforming heartbreak into action. That realization, fragile though it was, became the foundation for the next chapter. One where I would not just endure but rebuild, strengthen, and ultimately rise. In the weeks and months that followed, I began to see the first glimmers of life beyond heartbreak. At first, it was small things. Learning to balance our household on my own, paying bills on time, even discovering the satisfaction of managing the money Walter had left tangled in secrecy. Then came bigger steps. I took in sewing projects from neighbors, hemming skirts and repairing curtains, anything that could bring in a little extra income. The work itself became a kind of therapy. Each stitch, each folded seam, was a way to reclaim control, to say silently, I am still here. I still have worth. I can still provide. Slowly the children noticed too. Lena would peek over my shoulder when I embroidered a hem. Mark would toddle into the living room carrying scraps of fabric as if he too were helping. Together we turned our home into a workshop, a small empire built from patience and determination, laughter spilling over the smell of freshly baked bread and the hum of the sewing machine. As the months turned to years, I discovered talents I had long ignored, talents that had lain dormant under decades of family life and routine. I started selling my homemade quilts at the local market, each one a tapestry of memory and care. The money, once a source of fear, became a symbol of independence. Friends I had lost touch with came back into my life, inspired by the quiet tenacity I was displaying. And while he tried to re-enter the house with apologies and promises, but I had changed. I had learned that forgiveness did not mean returning to the way things were. I allowed him a place in our family, yes, but I no longer allowed him to dictate the terms of my life. Each Saturday when the card games called him away, I no longer waited with fear or suspicion. I went to the market, I tended my projects, I taught Lena to sew, I encouraged Mark's curiosity about numbers and letters. Every moment became a chance to rebuild and empower, to show the children what it means to rise from betrayal and heartbreak with dignity intact. The neighbors who had whispered now stopped, some out of respect, others out of awe. The house, once a place heavy with secrecy, became a sanctuary of resilience. I found that strength could be quiet but unmistakable, a force that didn't need loud words to be noticed. And perhaps the most beautiful transformation of all was in me. I learned that while life may hand you sorrow and betrayal, you are never powerless unless you choose to remain so. Each morning, as I brewed my tea and watched the sun spill golden light across the kitchen, I felt a peace that had been absent for far too long. I was no longer a woman defined by my husband's actions or the secrets he had carried. I was Evelyn, Evie, the grandmother who had faced loss, deception, and struggle, and had not only survived but had created a life of her own making, one rich with love, learning, and quiet pride. Triumph. Lena, who had spent those early years watching me shoulder burdens quietly, began to blossom into a confident young woman, her hands deft and sure from the countless hours we had spent sewing together. I watched her transform, standing taller each day, speaking with clarity, her laughter full and fearless. Mark, always curious and bright, poured himself into learning, often sitting by my side while I balanced accounts or stitched a quilt, asking questions, absorbing lessons, and dreaming big. The pride I felt for them was indescribable. It was as though every trial I had endured, every sleepless night, every heartache had been laying the foundation for their success. I found a quiet joy in seeing them thrive, a reminder that even amidst betrayal, life could still be generous in its own ways. Walter remained in the picture, but his role had shifted. I had learned to set boundaries, and while he shared in our family life, he no longer held the authority over my spirit he once did. That quiet assertion of self became a lesson for the children as well, a demonstration of resilience and dignity. The neighborhood, once whispering about his indiscretions and our difficulties, began to respect the life I had built with my own two hands and unwavering resolve. On weekends, while Walter continued his card games, I would host sewing circles, community gatherings, and sometimes simply sit on the porch watching Lena and Mark play, feeling the satisfaction of a life reclaimed. Each quilt I sold, each stitch completed, each project finished was a small victory, a symbol of empowerment I carried within me. In those moments I realized something profound. Survival is not the same as living. I had survived betrayal, financial struggle, and emotional pain, but now I was truly living. The children's achievements were reflections of that life, but so was my own transformation. I had discovered skills, confidence, and resilience I had never imagined I possessed. The envelope from Harold, the matchbook, the secret money, they were no longer instruments of fear or suspicion. They had become catalysts, driving me to face reality, to adapt, to rise stronger than before. And every night as I sat quietly in my favorite rocking chair, feeling the soft hum of the sewing machine or listening to the children recount their daily adventures, I knew that despite everything we had made it. There was an unexpected peace in knowing that my past, however painful, had given me the power to shape my future. Each Saturday, when I no longer anxiously waited for Walter, I felt freedom coursing through me, sweet and liberating. It was in these quiet moments that I truly understood the depth of endurance and the beauty of transformation. Betrayal had taken much, but it had also taught me more about myself than decades of comfort ever could. I had grown, I had rebuilt, and most importantly, I had shown Lena and Mark that even after heartbreak, life could still be abundant, full of opportunity, and rich with love. As the years continued to pass, I found myself sitting more often on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, watching the sun spill its golden light across the yard. The quiet that once felt oppressive now carried a gentle warmth. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The Saturday nights of uncertainty, the hidden envelopes, the phone calls, the matchbook, and the secret money. I remembered the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the whispered judgments of neighbors, and the moments when I had felt powerless. And yet here I was, older, wiser, and stronger than I had ever been in my youth. I had discovered a resilience I didn't know existed, learned to trust my instincts, and most importantly, found the courage to rebuild a life that was wholly mine. Watching Lena and Mark thrive, each pursuing their dreams with confidence and integrity, was the sweetest reward, a daily reminder that the pain I had endured had not been in vain. In those quiet hours, I often reflected on the lessons learned. Trust, I realized, is precious, but so is self-respect. Love can endure many trials, yet it must be tempered with honesty and transparency. Life is unpredictable, sometimes cruel, and yet beautiful in ways we don't always anticipate. Betrayal had been a shadow in my past, but it had also been the catalyst that revealed my inner strength and the depth of my character. Walter's missteps were his, not mine, and while our relationship had shifted, it had never diminished my own sense of self. I learned that forgiveness does not erase pain, but it allows one to move forward with clarity and peace. Now, as I sit on this porch, feeling the gentle breeze on my face and hearing the laughter of grandchildren playing in the yard, I understand that my story, though marked by hardship, is also one of triumph. I can speak openly about the past without being consumed by it, and I can share my experiences in the hope that others might find courage in their own challenges. To all the women who have endured quiet struggles, hidden betrayals, or moments when life seemed too heavy to bear, I say this: you are stronger than you realize. The journey may be long, the nights may be lonely, but the sun always rises, and with each day comes the chance to reclaim your life, your dignity, and your joy. And to you, dear viewers who have followed my story, thank you for listening, for allowing me to share my life, my struggles, and my victories. Your presence here, your engagement, your willingness to witness these experiences, is a gift. Remember, life is a tapestry woven from both the light and the dark, and it is in facing the shadows that we discover the brilliance of our own strength. Cherish your loved ones, honor your instincts, and never forget that even after the deepest heartbreak, the human spirit can rise, grow, and flourish in ways we could never imagine. Now, as I sit here in the gentle glow of my kitchen lamp, knitting quietly while the children and grandchildren play in the other room, I feel a sense of calm that I never imagined I would reach. The house that once echoed with suspicion, heartache, and unanswered questions now hums with life, laughter, and the warmth of family. Every corner holds memories, not only of the heartbreak and betrayal that once shadowed my life, but also of the resilience, courage, and quiet victories that followed. I often think back to that envelope from Harold, the lipstick-stained matchbook, the mysterious phone calls, and the hidden money. Each of these pieces, once symbols of confusion and betrayal, became turning points, moments that pushed me to awaken the strength I had long ignored. Life had tested me in unimaginable ways, and I emerged not just surviving but truly living. I want to speak to you, dear viewers, in the way I wish someone had spoken to me when I was younger. Life is full of unexpected trials, and sometimes those we love most will let us down. But betrayal, heartbreak, and struggle do not define you, they refine you. They shape the woman you will become if you face them with courage and honesty. I learned that trusting yourself is just as important as trusting others. I discovered the empowerment that comes from taking control of your own life, from working with your hands, your mind, and your heart to create stability and beauty even in the wake of chaos. I watched my children flourish, and in them, I saw the reflection of the strength that grew from my own choices, from my own perseverance. Watching them succeed, hearing their laughter, and witnessing their triumphs became a balm for the wounds that once felt endless. And so, my story ends not with bitterness, but with warmth, hope, and gentle wisdom. Life will challenge you, yes. It will test your patience, your trust, and your heart. But it will also offer you moments of pure joy, unexpected beauty, and the chance to rise stronger than you ever imagined. Remember to cherish the little things. A warm cup of tea, a child's laugh, the feeling of sun on your face, the sound of your own voice telling your story. It is these moments that remind us why we endure, why we forgive, and why we continue to love even when the past feels heavy. Thank you for letting me share my life with you. From the Saturday nights of uncertainty, the letters, the secrets, and the heartbreak, to the quiet victories, the quilts, the laughter of children, and the unwavering sense of purpose I found within myself. If my story resonates with you, please like, comment, and subscribe, and know that no matter the shadows in your past, the light of strength, hope, and resilience is always within your reach. Life is a tapestry, my dears, woven from threads of joy, sorrow, courage, and love. Treasure each thread, and you will discover that even after the darkest storms, your heart can still find warmth and your spirit can still soar.